They told him he didn't belong. It's an old man at the edge of a new world, forgotten, faded, standing on the sidelines of a parade that once would have marched for him. His uniform was worn, his medals dull. The stories written on his skin ignored. By those too busy to notice, people whispered, some pointed, most just walked by, because that's what time does. It forgets, it erases, until all that's left is a shadow of who someone once was. But sometimes the smallest eyes can see what the world refuses to. A child saw him, not the way others did, not as an old man, but as something more. The child stepped away from the crowd, stepped into the silence, raised a hand, a salute. Simple, pure. And in that moment, the world stopped, because honor doesn't fade with time. It doesn't rust or wrinkle. It lives, it breathes, and sometimes takes the heart of a child to remind us all that sacrifice never goes out of style. They told him he didn't belong. The words were never spoken out loud, but he could hear them all the same in the way people glanced at him then looked away, in the way the crowd shifted subtly as he approached, in the way no one made space for. The weight he carried was a bright morning in the heart of a small town. The kind of morning where the air smelled of fresh-cut grass and cotton candy, where families lined the sidewalks in folding chairs, waving tiny flags. Children sat on parents' shoulders. High school bands tuned. Their instruments' floats shimmered in the distance, waiting to make their way down the street. Town's annual parade was a tradition older than most of the people gathered that day. It was a celebration of freedom, of community, of life itself, but for one man standing quietly at the corner of Main and Cedar, it felt like something else entirely. He stood alone, a frail figure in a faded uniform, medals pinned to his chest, glinting softly in the sunlight, each one telling a story no one stopped to ask about, each one representing moments of sacrifice, moments of courage, moments he had tried so hard to forget yet could never fully leave behind. To most, he was invisible, a relic of another time, a forgotten soldier, a man out of place in a world that had moved on. But the truth was far different. His name was Walter James Ellis, 91 years old. A veteran of wars that existed now only in history books and the fading memories of men. Like him, he had worn the uniform with pride, served his country without question, buried friends, held the weight of unspeakable things, and now he stood at the edge of this parade, watching the colors and smiles and music, a silent observer of a world he had helped protect but no longer seemed to recognize him. He hadn't come looking for attention, hadn't come for recognition or praise. He came because deep inside, a small part of him still believed in what the parade stood for: freedom, unity, sacrifice. But it didn't take long to notice the whispers, the side glances, the cold shoulders. A group of young men in crisp new uniforms stood a few feet away. Their laughter was light, but it carried. One of them motioned toward. Walter shrugged, chuckled under his breath. Too old, too slow to forgotten. Walter lowered his gaze, the same way he had learned to do decades earlier, when things became too heavy to bear. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't have seen, was that someone was watching. A child no older than 7, with wide, curious eyes. A boy who had been taught to look for heroes, not in the pages of comic books, but in the quiet corners of real life. The boy tugged at his mother's hand, pointed, asked a question too soft for anyone else to hear, and in that instant the world began to change. The boy saw what the others missed, not the wrinkles or the weariness, not the stooped shoulders or the trembling hands. He saw the medals, the symbols, the story written in silence across Walter's chest. The boy stepped forward, one small step after another, till he stood just a few feet from the old man. Walter felt the presence before he saw it, lifted his head, met the child's gaze for a moment. Neither of them spoke. The noise of the parade carried on around them, the music, the cheers, the footsteps, but inside that small circle of space-time seemed to slow. And then the boy did something no one expected. He raised his hand, a simple gesture, a salute, and, in that fragile moment, something unspoken passed between them, a bridge built across generations, across silence, across the heavy weight of memory. Walter's eyes glistened. He straightened without thinking. the weight of years lifting just enough for him to stand tall once more. The world didn't notice, not yet. The floats rolled by. The flags waved, the bands played, but in that small forgotten corner of the parade route, a child's heart had seen the unseen, and the first spark of something greater had been lit. Walter blinked, tears threatening to fall, and somewhere deep in his chest, a heart that had once known only battle, only loss, only silence, felt something stir: hope, recognition, the quiet return of dignity. And, though the world kept moving, though the whispers hadn't yet stopped, a change had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. The mother watched silently, her hand still resting on her son's shoulder. She hadn't expected this, hadn't anticipated the pull that had drawn her little boy across the pavement toward the man in the faded uniform. For a moment she considered calling him back, but something in the way the old man stood, something in the way the boy's small hand lifted in that quiet salute, stopped her words before they left her lips. She wasn't the only one watching now. A few heads in the crowd began to turn: curiosity at first, then confusion, and then something softer, something deeper. Walter held the boy's eyes, his own trembling hands raised slowly, and before he even realized what he was doing, he returned the salute. It was not the sharp military precision of his younger years. It was shaky, slow, but it was real. It was everything. Air seemed to shift. The breeze carried the distant strains of a marching band. But in that sacred pocket of stillness, noise faded, and memory rose. Walter's mind drifted, unbidden, to another place, another team, a field of mud, the thunder of artillery, the faces of men he once called brothers, the sounds of distant shouts, the smell of smoke and fear. And courage blended into something he could never quite describe, but could never forget. He remembered the weight of a rifle in his arms, the cold of the ground, the moment he thought he would not live to see the dawn, and then just as quickly the memory slipped away, replaced by the small face standing before him now, a face full of innocence, of kindness, of something he hadn't seen in years: respect. Boy's hand dropped, and Walter let his own fall as well, the two of them standing together in the middle of something neither fully understood, but both could feel. From the corner of his eye, Walter saw movement. One of the young soldiers who had been laughing earlier had stopped, his gaze fixed on the scene unfolding, his face no longer mocking, but thoughtful. Something about the child's simple act had struck him. It started small, a few claps from the far side of the street, uncertain, hesitant, then more scattered hands coming together in applause. Not loud, not showy, but genuine. Walter turned slightly confused at first, then realization dawning as more people began to notice: mothers, fathers, children, old and young. They began to stand, to clap, to nod. They didn't know his name, they didn't know his story, but in that moment none of it mattered. What mattered was the uniform, the medals, the history written in scars unseen, but deeply felt in the boy. The boy who had seen what others overlooked, who had reminded a town, reminded the world that gratitude is not just for history books or ceremonial days. It is for the living, breathing souls who still walk among us, carrying the weight of what they gave. Walter's throat tightened, he swallowed hard, the warmth rising behind his eyes unstoppable now. A tear slipped free, tracing a slow line down his weathered cheek. He hadn't felt this scene in decades, hadn't felt this valued, this human. The boy smiled, just a soft, simple curve of the lips, then turned and walked back to his mother as if he had done the most natural thing in the world. And maybe, just maybe, he had. Walter remained still, frozen in place, as more hands joined the applause, as more faces turned toward him with expressions he could hardly process. The whispers had stopped, the mocking glances vanished, and in their place a quiet reverence grew. The parade marched on, but its rhythm had shifted. The heartbeat of the day now carried something deeper, something truer. Walter lowered his hand to his side, fingers brushing the medals pinned to his chest. His heart beat steady, strong. For the first time in years he felt whole. A stranger stepped forward from the crowd, a middle-aged man with silver at his temples and tears in his eyes. He offered his hand. "Thank you, sir," he said softly. "Thank you for everything." Walter took the hand without thinking, nodded once, words caught somewhere between his heart and throat. And then another person came, and another, each one reaching out in gratitude and recognition. The boy stood at the edge, watching his small face lit by the soft morning sun, unaware of the ripple he had set in motion, unaware that with one small gesture he had changed a life hand.
Out.
Walter, for the first time in decades, allowed himself to smile, the kind of smile that reaches the eyes, that warms the soul, that says without words, I am seen, I am remembered, I am not alone. The wind stirred, the flags waved. Above them all, the sound of a community awakening to the power of kindness filled the air. The young soldier who had laughed earlier stood motionless, now his smile gone, replaced by something far more serious, a quiet heaviness in his eyes. As he watched the scene unfold, he seemed to shrink inside himself, as if realizing in that instant the weight of the uniform he wore and the legacy it carried. He lowered his head slightly, crossed his arms, and for the first time he looked at the old man not as a relic, but as a living, breathing monument to everything he himself had sworn to uphold. Walter barely noticed his mind was still swimming, his heart still racing from the quiet explosion of humanity that had ignited around him. The child stood back in his mother's arms now, safe, warm, but his gaze never left Walter. The boy's small hand reached for the mother's as he whispered something only she could hear. Her eyes softened, and without a word she nodded. She knelt beside her son, brushed the hair from his forehead, gave him a soft kiss that spoke volumes without needing language. Walter felt the warmth of the sun on his face, felt the soft pull of the breeze through the fabric of his uniform, felt the weight of the medals. He had almost forgotten how to carry a parade float rolled by. Cheerful voices rang out, confetti drifted through the air, but the heart of the parade, the soul of the morning, had shifted. People whispered no longer in mockery, but in awe. A few children clutched their parents' hands tighter. A few old men wiped at their eyes with trembling fingers. Walter's vision blurred again, and he let the tears fall without shame, without apology. For too long he had held them back. For too long he had worn the silence like a second skin. Today, here that silence was broken, he thought of the faces he had left behind on foreign soil, names etched into stone monuments, voices silenced too soon, and somehow in the laughter of the crowd, in the music of the parade, he felt them, all of them, walking beside him. Boy's small act had opened a door Walter thought had been closed. Forever, a woman in her 30s approached. She carried a small bouquet of wildflowers in her hands. Her eyes were red from crying. She stopped just in front of Walter, her voice barely above a whisper. My grandfather served in the same war we lost him last year. I wanted to say thank you. She held the flowers out, her hands shaking slightly. Walter took them, his fingers brushing hers. His voice cracked as he tried to respond, but the words refused to come. Instead, he offered the smallest. Not a single tear tracing its way down his cheek. Woman smiled through her own tears, then stepped back. Her place quickly filled by another, and another. What began as a single moment had become a flood. The crowd that once ignored him now surrounded him, a circle of warmth, of gratitude, of faces lit with something deeper than surface-level celebration. The marching band played on, but its music felt distant. Walter's heart was too full to hear much else. One by one, people came forward, a father in his 40s, who had never served but whose own father had, a teenage girl whose brother was overseas right now, a grandmother who clutched a worn photograph of a young man in uniform taken decades ago. It carried something, a story, a memory, a whisper, of the past colliding with the present in a way that defied explanation. Walter's knees felt weak, but he stood, supported not by physical strength, but by the invisible hands of those who had gathered around him. The strength of being seen, of being remembered, of not walking alone. The child, the boy who had started it all, watched with wide eyes, his small heart perhaps too young to fully grasp what he had set into motion, but somehow wise enough to understand that something important was happening. His mother knelt beside him once more, explaining in hushed tones, her voice soft, her words gentle. Walter caught her eye. She smiled, a warm, honest smile that said, "Thank you," without sound. In the old man who had come to the parade expecting only loneliness, only the cold brush of indifference, now stood at the very center of something rare and beautiful. The laughter that had once stung his ears was gone. The shadows of dismissal had vanished. In their place stood light, connection, and the quiet miracle of human kindness. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rang, a signal that the parade would soon reach its main square. But Walter barely noticed, for in this moment, in this fragile, fleeting space and time, he was not forgotten, he was not invisible, he was not alone, and that was everything asterisk. The old man stood still, but something inside him had shifted. Something that had been locked away for decades had stirred. The burden he carried, the weight of memory, the silent ache of battles fought in brothers. Lost, it all felt a little lighter now. The applause began to fade, but the eyes remained soft eyes, grateful eyes, each one reflecting back to him a version of himself he had almost forgotten existed. Walter glanced down at the wildflowers in his hand. Simple, fragile, beautiful, a gift from a stranger, but it meant more than words could say. He exhaled slowly, the tightness in his chest easing just a little, his fingers brushing the worn fabric of his uniform, a silent thank you to those who had come before him, and a silent promise to those who still served the child, the boy who had sparked this quiet revolution. Still watched from his mother's side, innocence in his face, untouched by the cynicism of the world, and yet in that innocence there was wisdom. Walter caught the boy's eye and gave him the smallest nod that carried 1,000 unspoken truths, a nod that said, "I see you, and I thank you." The boy smiled in return. A shy, genuine smile that warmed Walter's heart in a way he hadn't felt in years, and then something unexpected happened. A man stepped forward from the crowd, tall, broad-shouldered. Dressed not in uniform but in the simple clothes of everyday life, in his hands he carried something wrapped in velvet. He approached Walter slowly, with reverence, with caution. "Sir," he said softly, "I don't know if you'll remember me, but my father served with you. He spoke of you often. He called you the bravest man he ever knew." Walter. His breath caught the faces of long-lost friends, flashing through his mind, memories so vivid he could almost hear their voices again. The man continued, "He passed away last year, and before he did, he asked me to find you if I ever could, to thank you for saving his life, and to give you this." With careful hands he unwrapped the velvet bundle, revealing a small medal, old, tarnished by time, but unmistakable in its meaning. Walter, his knees nearly buckled, he reached out, fingers trembling as they brushed against the metal. His voice, when it came, was barely audible. "I remember him." The man's eyes filled with tears. He pressed the medal into Walter's palm. "My father said he owed you everything, that without you I wouldn't be standing here today." The two men stood their generations apart, bound by something deeper than words, the threads of sacrifice and survival woven together in silence. The crowd seemed to sense the weight of the moment. Hushed voices, soft footsteps. No one wanted to break the spell. Walter closed his fingers around the medal, clutched it to his chest, and for the first time in years he allowed the full weight of memory to wash over him without resistance. It wasn't just about war or medals or uniforms. It was about life, about moments that shape us, about the people who leave fingerprints on our souls long after they are gone. He raised his eyes, met the gaze of the man before him, and whispered the only words he could find, "Thank you." The man nodded, tears slipping free as he stepped back, leaving Walter once more in the center of the gathering crowd. But this time he wasn't alone. This time he was surrounded by warmth, by faces that no longer turned away, by voices that no longer whispered in judgment. The parade music swelled in the distance, the bright notes of a marching band carrying through the air, but the heart of the day belonged here, to this small circle of humanity. To the moment when time stood still, Walter wiped at his eyes, smiled a true smile, the kind that comes from the marrow of the bones, from the deepest corners of the heart. And though the parade marched on, though the floats rolled by, the real story of the day had already been written in the eyes of a child, in the hands of a stranger. In the simple act of remembering, for the first time in years, Walter felt seen, felt valued, felt alive in the journey that had brought him here. The silent burdens he had carried, the battles he had fought both on distant shores and within himself, all of it, every moment, had led to Thesa. Moment of grace, a moment of truth, a moment he would carry with him for the rest of his days. The wind picked up slightly, carrying with it the soft rustle of flags. The scent of popcorn and fresh grass filled the air as the parade pressed on, but those who stood near Walter hardly noticed the floats or the music. Their eyes remained fixed On the man who had become the heart of the morning without ever asking for it. Walter breathed deeply, his fingers still resting gently over the metal, pressed against his chest, the warmth of the gesture still burning in his heart. The boy shifted slightly in his mother's arms, his wide eyes taking in every detail as if some part of his young heart understood the gravity of what had just happened. He looked up at his mother, whispered something, and she smiled softly. Her hands brushed through his hair as she nodded. The boy stepped forward again, this time without fear, without hesitation. Walter watched him approach. The world around them seemed to fade into soft colors and distant sound. Child stopped just before him, lifted something small in his hand. It was a toy, a tiny plastic soldier, faded from years of play, but held gently with reverence for you. The boy whispered, "It's my favorite. I want you to have it." Walter stared, the weight of the small gift somehow heavier than any metal he had ever received. He knelt slowly, bones stiff with age, but heart softening with every breath. He reached out and took the toy soldier, cradling it with the same care one might give to a fragile piece of glass. "Thank you," he managed, his voice thick, barely a whisper. The boy smiled, simple, pure, and turned back to his mother without another word. Walter remained kneeling, the small toy in one hand, the old metal in the other, two worlds colliding in his palm. Two lifetimes connected by something beyond explanation. The crowd that had gathered remained silent. Some wiped at tears. Others simply stood, hands over their hearts. The air felt different now, thicker, softer, as if something invisible and sacred had taken hold of the morning and refused to let go. Walter rose slowly. A man helped steady him, the young soldier who had laughed earlier, the one who had realized too late the weight of his own words. "Sir," the young man said quietly, "I was wrong. I didn't know." Walter looked into his eyes, saw not mockery but remorse, a soft sadness only those who have never tasted war can carry. He nodded once, a small gesture of forgiveness that said more than any speech could ever hold. The young soldier stepped back, shoulders squared, eyes downcast. Changed forever by a lesson learned without words. The parade music shifted, the final float approaching in the distance, but Walter's heart was far from the rhythm of drums and brass. He stood taller, straighter, the toy soldier still in his hand. The crowd around him now a living, breathing testament to something deeper than celebration. It wasn't about flags or floats. It wasn't about noise or spectacle. It was about memory, about gratitude, about the silent threads that connect one life to another across generations. A man in his 60s approached next, a veteran too, by the look of his walk, by the glint in his eye. He didn't speak, simply reached for Walter's hand. They shook firmly, a shared understanding passing between them, without the need for language. And then others came one by one, each carrying their own reasons, their own memories, their own pieces of the tapestry. Walter accepted each hand, each nod, each whispered thank you with quiet grace. The burden he had carried for so long, slowly dissolving in the warmth of human kindness. The boy had returned to his mother's side, his small face glowing with something gentle and timeless. He looked up at her, she smiled, and together they watched the world around them shift into something rare and precious. Walter wiped at his eyes once more, a deep breath filling his lungs. The parade rolled on, the music played, but his heart had already found what it came for, a world that too often forgets, that too often moves too fast today, stood still, and in that stillness, a man was seen, a life was honored, and the simple power of one child's heart lit the way for them all. Asterisk, the sound of distant drums still echoed through the streets, but for those gathered around Walter, it was as if the parade had faded into the background. The true heartbeat of the day was here, in the circle of warmth that had grown around a man who once stood invisible and alone. Walter's eyes moved over the faces, some young, some old, some dressed in Sunday best, others in worn work clothes, but every single one of them carried the same expression: respect, gratitude, something deeper than words. He shifted the tiny toy soldier in his hand. Its weight felt oddly familiar, as if it belonged there, as if somehow this small symbol had unlocked something long buried within him. His mind drifted not to the battles, not to the pain. It's to the faces of those he had loved and lost, brothers in arms, men who had stood beside him in the Darkest hours, men who had laughed and wept and fought not for glory but for one another. For a moment he could almost hear them, feel them, as if time had thinned and the distance between past and present had vanished, and he was no longer alone. Breeze stirred a soft, gentle wind that brushed against his cheek, and for the first time in years, Walter smiled without the shadow of sadness. A soft voice broke through the stillness. "Sir, may I ask your name?" It was the young mother, her eyes still shining, her voice gentle but curious. Walter cleared his throat. The words felt heavy as they left his lips. Walter James, at least the name hung in the air, and with it, a quiet recognition settled over the faces nearby. The name mattered, the story mattered. Even if they hadn't known it before, they knew it now. One of the older men nodded. "I've heard of you," he said softly. "Oh, you served in the 42nd Division, didn't you?" Walter nodded slowly, surprised but moved. "Yes, I did." The man's eyes filled with tears. "My father always spoke of the 42nd, he used to say. Those men were the bravest he ever met." "I'm honored, sir, truly honored." Walter felt his throat tighten again, but this time he let the emotions rise, let the tears come. They were no longer something to hide, they were part of the journey, part of the healing. The young soldier from before stepped closer, his voice hesitant but sincere. "Sir, I lunted. So I wanted to say I'm sorry for how I acted. I didn't understand. I do now. Thank you for everything you did for all of us." Walter looked into the young man's eyes, saw not judgment but growth, a lesson learned in real time. He reached out, placed a gentle hand on the soldier's shoulder. "Thank you for saying that. It means more than you know." The soldier's eyes glistened. He straightened his back, nodded, and stepped back into the circle. The crowd around Walter seemed to grow larger still.
Ow.
Each person carrying a piece of their own story, their own connection to sacrifice, to service, to the threads that weave a nation together. Man in uniform, older, his chest decorated with medals of his own, stepped forward next, saluted sharply, and without a word embraced. Walterette was a brief hug, a soldier's embrace, strong, silent, unbreakable. The two men pulled back, nodded to one another, no words necessary. The boy clapped softly, his small hands coming together with innocent joy. And the sound of his applause, light, pure, was soon joined by others, more hands, more clapping, a soft, a ripple of appreciation that filled the air like music. Walter's heart swelled. The loneliness he had carried for so long melted away, replaced by something he hadn't felt in years. Belonging. The toy soldier still rested in his palm, a small symbol of a larger truth, that sometimes the smallest gestures, the quietest voices, can spark the greatest change. The mother leaned down, whispered in her son's ear. The boy's eyes lit up, and he stepped forward once more. This time he didn't stop. He reached for Walter's free hand, small fingers curling around the old man's with gentle trust. Walter looked down, surprised, moved beyond words. He closed his hand around the boy's without hesitation. The crowd watched in silence. The moment unfolding like the soft turning of a page. A child and a veteran, two souls separated by decades, yet bound together by something timeless. The parade's music swelled in the distance, but here in this quiet space, a different kind of song filled the air, a song of remembrance, of gratitude, of the simple human need to be seen, to be valued, to be loved. Dorter stood tall, his hand in the boy's, his heart full, and for the first time in far too long he felt whole. The hand of the child was small but steady. Walter held it gently, feeling the soft warmth of life that pulsed through the boy's fingertips. It was a simple gesture, one that carried no fanfare, no ceremony, but to Walter it felt like the weight of an entire lifetime easing off his shoulders. The boy's mother stood just a step behind her, eyes shining with quiet emotion. She didn't speak, she didn't need to. Her smile said it all. The two stood together, the old man and the child, the parade moving on in the distance, but for them, time had slowed. The world had narrowed into this sacred moment more. People stepped forward now, drawn not by spectacle, but by something deeper. One by one, they came. A teenage girl with a homemade thank you card she had carried for no reason other than her parents had taught her to be grateful. An elderly woman clutching the edges of a photograph, her hands trembling as she held out the faded image of a man in uniform. "My husband," she whispered. "He never made it home, but he would have wanted me to thank you." Walter's hands shook as he accepted the photograph. He met the woman's eyes. No words came, but none were needed. The shared grief, the shared pride, all of it passed between them in silence. Small crowd around them began to grow. People who moments before had been strangers were now linked by invisible threads of memory and respect to heaven. The parade announcer's voice softened as he passed, his cheerful tone giving way to something more solemn. In the crowd today, we are honored by the presence of Mr. Walter James Ellis, a hero among us. The words echoed across the loudspeakers, and something in the air shifted. The attention of the entire parade seemed to shift with its eyes turned. Hands lifted in applause. Once more Walter's heart ached in the best possible way. He lifted the photograph in one hand, the toy soldier in the other, symbols of two worlds colliding, two generations meeting at the crossroads of kindness and remembrance. Young soldier from before returned this time, not with laughter, but with respect. He stood before Walter, saluted, and spoke softly, "Would you mind, sir? Could I walk with you?" A while Walter blinked. A tear sliding free, he nodded without words. The soldier stepped to his side, the boy still holding Walter's hand, and together they began to walk, not away from the parade, but into it. The crowd parted, a soft wave of applause following them, as if the heart of the celebration had shifted to their path. The boy looked up, smiling, his fingers still laced with Walter's. The soldier walked in, step his uniform crisp, his face solemn. They walked slowly past floats, past bands, past faces alight with something pure and rare. Walter's steps were slow, but steady, each footfall carrying the weight of memory, the echoes of voices long gone, and yet, for the first time in years, he didn't feel crushed beneath it. He felt lifted, the toy soldier pressed in his palm, the photograph resting over his heart, the warmth of a child's hand in his own. The crowd clapped softly. Some people waved, some simply stood, their hands pressed over their hearts. Eyes filled with unshed tears, the announcer's voice cracked slightly as he spoke again. Let us all remember today the true meaning of this parade, the true meaning of service, of sacrifice, of honor that never fades. Walter's throat tightened. He pressed his lips together, tried to speak, but no words formed. And then the boy whose simple salute had started it all, looked up and whispered something. "I'm proud of youth." Words hit him like a gentle wave, soft, unassuming, but powerful beyond measure. Walter smiled, a true, genuine smile that touched the corners of his eyes. He squeezed the boy's hand gently. In return, they reached the heart of the parade route, the place where the main crowd gathered, and as they arrived, the applause swelled again, not a roar. It's not thunderous, but steady, heartfelt, pure. Walter's eyes scanned the faces, so many strangers, so many lives, but in that moment, they were all connected, and, for the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe it, to feel it, to carry it deep inside. The young soldier at his side turned slightly. "Sir, we walk because of you, all of us, we serve. Because you served first." Walter blinked away tears, his voice soft but clear. "Thank you, son. That means more than you know." The soldier nodded, the boy grinned. And together they moved forward, step by step, past the crowd, past the floats, past the music hand. Though the parade would soon end, though the day would fade, the memory of this moment, this simple, beautiful moment, would live on forever. The air was golden now, sun climbing higher, casting soft light across the street where Walter walked. Each step carried not just by his tired legs, but by the silent energy of the people around him. Their faces glowed with something almost sacred, the recognition that they were witnessing not just a parade, but a living story unfolding before their eyes. Boy's small hand remained in Walter's. His grip was firm but gentle, his eyes lit with the kind of pure admiration only a child can offer. And Walter, for all the decades that weighed on his heart, felt lighter than he had in years. The soldier at his side walked with solemn grace, each footstep precise, his eyes focused ahead, but every so often he glanced at Walter with quiet reverence. Applause followed them, not wild, not forced, but steady, a heartbeat of gratitude that echoed from one side of the street to the other. Walter's mind drifted again. He thought of his first parade decades earlier. When he returned home in a different time, a different world, he remembered the faces then, to some smiling, some distant, some filled with shadows they could not name, but today felt different. Today, the walls were thinner. The hearts were open. They passed a family holding a banner that read, "We remember you." "Thank you, Walters, Breath caught in his throat, his eyes stung, he raised a trembling hand in quiet acknowledgement. The child beside him beamed, looking up as if he had just witnessed something magical. Soldier smiled to a soft, gentle curve of the lips. No word spoken, but everything understood. They kept moving the wind, brushing their faces, the soft rustle of flags overhead blending with the distant music of the parade. Walter felt something deep inside. A warmth that spread from his chest outward, something he could not name but could feel, the sensation of belonging, of being seen, of having his story carried forward by hands younger than his own. A woman stepped forward. She held a bouquet of red poppies. Her face was streaked with tears. She whispered, "For you, sir, for all of you." Walter accepted the flowers, his hands shaking, his heart full. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice barely above the breeze. She pressed a hand to her heart and stepped back. The faces blurred as more came forward. Some pressed their palms together in silent prayer. Others clapped. Some simply wept. The parade slowed as it reached the center of town, the floats pausing, the music softening. All eyes turned toward Walter and the boy and the soldier who walked beside him. Announcer's voice returned low and reverent. "Friends, I'll take a moment to recognize that heroes walk among us, still not in statues, not just in history books, but in flesh and blood, in stories still unfolding, in lives that continue to teach us the meaning of courage." The words wrapped around Walter's heart like a gentle embrace. His eyes burned, his breath quickened, but he kept moving. One step, then another. The boy squeezed his hand. The soldier gave a small nod. In that instant, Walter no longer felt like a man out of time, no longer felt like a forgotten figure in the background of history. He felt alive, seen, cherished. The parade resumed its rhythm, the music returning, the laughter lifting. But the core of the day had already been written, a memory forged, a lesson etched into the hearts of all who witnessed it. Walter allowed himself to exhale, to release decades of quiet ache, to let the warmth of the moment seep into his bones. He looked down at the toy soldier still cradled in his palm, a small, fragile thing, but powerful beyond measure. The boy followed his gaze, smiled, and whispered softly, "He's safe now." Walter blinked, the tears finally falling, not from pain, not from loss, but from the overwhelming beauty of the moment. He tightened his grip on the boy's hand, lifted his chin, and walked forward, because sometimes the greatest battles are not fought with weapons, but with remembrance, with kindness, with the simple act of reaching for one another across the distance of time. And on this day, in this place, that battle had been won. The steps came easier now. Walter moved not with the stiffness of age, but with the quiet grace of someone who has remembered why he stood tall in the first place. The boy's small hand anchored him. The young soldier's steady presence at his side reminded him that the torch had not been dropped. It had only passed from one hand to another. Crowd pressed in closer as they neared the heart of the square, the sea of faces glowing with something deeper than simple celebration. Each person carried a spark of recognition, a shared understanding, a soft awakening to the truth that had unfolded before them. An elderly man stepped forward, his back bent with age, his hands shaking as he leaned on a wooden cane, his eyes locked on Walter's. For a moment the two veterans said nothing, only stared, only breathed. Then, without warning, the man saluted, sharp, precise, a gesture that time could not take away. Walter returned it slowly, their eyes glistening, the silence between them thick with memories neither needed to speak aloud. The crowd clapped soft and steady, and the two old men held their salutes just a moment longer before lowering their hands in unspoken unity. The boy clutched Walter's fingers tighter, looking from one to the other, his young face full of awe and something more, a dawning realization that some moments stay with you forever, even if you're too young to fully understand why. Walter, his heart swelled. He felt the weight of generations, felt the presence of those he had once stood beside, felt the warmth of the present pressing gently into the cold edges of the pasta. Little girl stepped out of the crowd, her dress bright with summer flowers. In her hand she carried a crayon drawing stick figures beneath a bright sun, a flag in the corner. She handed it to Walter without a word, her cheeks pink with shy pride. He took it carefully, held it as if it were made of glass. A tear traced down his cheek. "Thank you, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice shaking. Girl smiled and ran back to her parents. Another tiny moment, another ripple in the growing tide of kindness. The soldier beside Walter cleared his throat. "Sir, would you allow me to escort you the rest of the way? It would be an honor," Walter's voice caught, but he nodded, grateful beyond words. The boy's mother approached, then her eyes soft, her smile gentle. She knelt beside her son, whispered something. The boy looked up at Walter, his eyes shining. "I want to walk with you too," he said. "If that's okay." Walter swallowed hard, his heart too full to speak. He nodded once, squeezed the boy's hand, and together they continued. The crowd parted gently. No one rushed. No one pushed. It was as if the entire world had softened. More people waved more hands, clapped, some bowed their heads, some placed hands over their hearts. Walter carried their faces in his memory as he walked, each one an ember of the fire that had been rekindled in his chest. The announcer's voice returned, this time softer a voice. Heavy with emotion, ladies and gentlemen, today we are reminded that some heroes do not wear capes, they do not seek applause, they do not ask to be seen. And yet when we pause, when we truly look, we find them, we honor them, and we carry their stories. Forward, Walter's steps grew stronger with each word. The boy kept pace. The soldier walked taloned. For a moment the world stood still. Again Walter thought of the friends he had lost, the battle survived. The silent prayers whispered into dark skies. And he knew deep in his bones that they were here too, walking beside him in ways no eye could see, but every heart could feel. The square opened before them, the final stretch, the culmination of the journey he had never expected but would never forget. The clapping swelled, the sun shone brighter, and for the first time in decades Walter allowed himself to truly believe that no sacrifice is ever truly forgotten, no story ever fully erased, no life ever lived in vain. And with the toy soldier still in his hand, the warmth of the child's fingers, the strength of the young soldier's steps beside him, he moved forward toward the heart of the day, toward the embrace of a grateful world, toward the gentle promise that echoes beyond time. The square stretched wide ahead of them, bathed in the soft glow of the late morning sun. Banners fluttered in the gentle breeze. The scent of fresh flowers drifted on the air, but all eyes were on the trio moving slowly down the center. The old soldier, the young boy, and the man in uniform walking silently at their side. Applause softened into something quieter, not lesser, but deeper, a reverent hush, as if every soul present understood, without needing to speak, that something sacred was unfolding. Before them, Walter felt each step as a gift. His heart swelled with gratitude that left his chest aching in the sweetest way. He still held the toy soldier, still carried the photograph pressed gently beneath his metal, symbols of past and present, woven together into something he could barely comprehend. The boy looked up at him again, his eyes full of wonder. "Are you tired, Sir Walter?" Lips curved into a soft smile. "Not yet, son. Not today." The boy grinned, his small hand never letting go. They crossed the square, the announcer's voice breaking gently through the quiet. "Friends, let us rise together as one. Let us stand in honor of Mr. Walter James Ellis and all those whose stories remind us of the price of freedom." One by one the crowd stood, from the youngest children to the oldest elders, a sea of faces rising in silent tribute. Walter's throat tightened, his breath caught. He blinked, tears spilling freely now, without shame. The soldier at his side saluted, the boy followed, lifting his small hand once more in the gesture that had started it. All Walter lifted his own hand, slow, shaking but sure. The flags above them rippled in the breeze. The sunlight caught the edges of his medals, and for one perfect, breathless moment, time seemed to fold in on itself. He could see them, the faces of the men he had once called brothers, smiling, saluting. Walking with him still, the boy's voice came softly. "You're my hero, Sir Walter." Lowered his hand, looked down, the weight of the words wrapping around his heart. "Thank you, that means everything." The clapping began, again soft at first, then building, not wild, not loud, but steady. A heartbeat of gratitude rising from the square and rolling across the crowd. The boy's mother stood to the side, her hand pressed over her heart, her eyes shining. The young soldier wiped at his own eyes. His face no longer the face of someone detached or unknowing. It had changed. The moment had carved something permanent into him. Walter's steps slowed. The parade had moved beyond them now. The floats gone, the music distant, But it didn't matter. The heart of the day was here people stepped forward, not to speak, not to intrude, but simply to stand, to offer hands, to offer quiet nods of respect. Walter reached the far side of the square, the journey complete. The boy squeezed his hand one last time before letting go. "Thank you, Sir Walter." Crouched slowly, his knees creaking, but his heart steady, he looked into the boy's eyes and whispered, "Thank you. Son, you saved me today." The boy's eyes widened. "I did." Walter nodded. "Yes, you did." The boy's smile lit his whole face. He turned, ran back to his mother's open arms. Walter stood straightened, his eyes scanning the faces around him. The soldier stepped. "Close one final time, sir. Would you mind? Could I have a photo with you?" Walter chuckled softly, nodded. Of course, a phone appeared, a quick snap. A picture that would live not just in memory, but in the hearts of all who had witnessed the morning unfold. Soldier saluted. "Sir, thank you always." Walter returned it, lowered his hand slowly, and then for the first time in a long time, he turned his eyes to the sky, smiled, and let the warmth of the sun wash over him. The child's salute, the community's embrace. The silent footprints of those who had gone before him, all of it, every precious piece, etched into his heart forever. And as he took his first quiet steps away from the square, he knew one simple truth. Sometimes all it takes is one small hand, one small heart to change everything. Walter's steps were slow now, but they carried no heaviness. Each movement felt lighter, as if the weight he had shouldered for so many years had been lifted, not erased, not forgotten, but shared. The boy's small figure faded into the crowd still. Waving, his smile burned into Walter's memory like a gentle flame that would never dim. The soldier remained close, his stride respectful but protective, as if he too had felt the shift in the air, as if he too understood that this was no ordinary. Datha Square behind them still hummed with soft applause and whispered gratitude. The faces blurred, but the feeling stayed. The warmth of it filled every corner of Walter's chest. He held the toy soldier in one hand, his fingers brushing over the smooth plastic, a symbol of innocence, of hope, of the strange and beautiful way small things carry great meaning. Path led them toward the edge of the park, where the parade would end, but the journey felt far from over. Walter paused, his breath catching, his eyes lifted to the sky for a moment. He said nothing, simply stood, allowing the quiet to settle over him like a soft blanket. Soldier waited, respectful still. Walter's voice broke the silence. "I never thought I'd see a day like this." The soldier nodded slowly. "Neither did I, sir. Neither did I." Walter turned his gaze back to the crowd. His eyes traced the banners, the flags, the children running, laughter echoing in the distance, but beneath it all, there was something deeper. Something quiet and ancient, the heartbeat of memory, the invisible thread that connected every face in that crowd to every story of sacrifice. Walter reached into his pocket, pulled free a worn piece of fabric, an old handkerchief, faded but neatly folded. He pressed it to his eyes, then returned it without a word. The soldier spoke gently. "You fought so we could stand here today, sir, so we could walk freely, so that child could smile without fear." Walter's eyes met his, soft, grateful. The wind stirred, carrying the scent of fresh grass and sunlight. They moved again, one step, then another, the distance shrinking between them and the finish line. But Walter knew, even as the path ended, the journey had only just begun. He glanced down at the toy soldier once more, the edges worn from a child's hands, a symbol of the innocence he had fought to protect. A gift that would live longer than any medal ever could. A family stepped forward quietly. The father carried a folded flag, the mother held a photograph, their daughter clutched a single white rose. They said no word, simply offered the items in silence. Walter's hands trembled as he accepted them, his eyes flickering over the photograph. A young man in uniform, eyes bright, smile wide. Walter whispered softly. He served the father, nodded. Iraq, he said. "We lost him 5 years ago." Walter exhaled slowly. His heart ached. But he met the man's eyes and nodded once. "I'm so sorry, son. I'm so sorry." The mother wiped her eyes. "Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your service, for his, for all of them." Walter pressed the photograph gently against his heart, the rose in his free hand, and somehow Somehow the tears felt right, not bitter, not empty, but full of meaning. The family stepped back, joined the quiet crowd that followed his steps, and Walter felt the threads grow stronger, the tapestry of remembrance weaving itself in real time. The soldier's voice was soft again. "Sir, would you mind if I told my unit about this? About you?" Walter smiled through. Blurred eyes. "I would be honored, son. Tell them, they're never alone." The soldier nodded, his chin lifted, his eyes bright with emotion. They reached the final stretch, the sun hanging high, the breeze still soft against their faces. Walter's heart beat steady, his hands full of memory, his steps guided by the invisible presence of every life he had touched and every life that had touched his own hand. Though the parade was ending, though the crowds would soon fade, the story would remain a simple truth carried on the wind, that sometimes a single act of kindness, a single child's heart, can remind the world of what truly matters. The finish line of the parade came into view, a simple white banner stretched across the end of the street. Beyond it, the park opened, wide green grass, tall trees. A quiet place where the celebration would give way to reflection. Walter's steps slowed, the soldier matched his pace. Neither rushed, neither spoke for a long moment. Settled over them both, not heavy, not painful, but profound. Boy and his mother still lingered at the edge of the crowd, the boy's hand waving one last time. Walter smiled, lifted his own hand in return, the smallest gesture, but it felt like a bridge spanning across the generations. As they reached the banner, a small group stood waiting, veterans, men and women, some in uniform, some in civilian clothes, each one standing tall, each one carrying the quiet dignity that only those who have seen the worst of humanity and survive can carry. Walter's breath caught. He recognized some of the faces, not from life, but from the echoes of memory. The tilt of a chin, the way a hand brushed the brim of a hat, reflections of the brothers he had left behind, the shadows of those who had once stood beside him in distant fields, far from home. One by one, the veterans saluted. Walter returned, its slow, precise, his hands steady despite the tremble in his heart. The soldier beside him saluted, two eyes forward, chest lifted. The crowd hushed again, the music soft in the distance, all eyes fixed on the gathering. At the finish, linear woman stepped forward, her uniform crisp, her medals gleaming, her face etched with both strength and softness. She extended her hand. "Mr. Ellis," she said quietly, "it is an honor." Walter took her hand, felt the warmth of her palm against his. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice thick, his heart full. She nodded once, her eyes shining. "Because of you, sir," she whispered. "We are here." Walter swallowed hard, the wind brushing against his face, the sunlight still gentle on his skin. Another veteran stepped forward, an older man, his steps unsteady, but his salute sharp. The two shared a quiet nod before the man stepped back into the line. The soldier who had walked beside Walter leaned in softly. "You taught me something today, sir, something I won't forget." Walter's lips curved into the softest smile. "I'm the one who learned, son, today. Reminded me of who we are, of what we carry, of why it matters." The soldier nodded, his eyes damp, but steady. The boy's mother approached slowly, her hand resting on her son's shoulder. She met Walter's gaze with warmth. "Thank you, sir, for everything." Walter shook his head gently. "Thank him," he whispered, nodding toward the boy. "He's the reason this happened, though." Boy grinned, his eyes shining with pride. He stepped forward this time without hesitation, and once again lifted his hand in that small, perfect salute. Walter's heart broke and mended all at once. He returned the salute, slowly held. It felt the weight of the moment pressed deep into his bones. The applause swelled, soft at first, then louder, a gentle rolling wave of gratitude, of remembrance, of pure human connection. Walter lowered his hand, took a breath, and let the warmth of the moment carry him. The toy soldier still rested in his pocket, the photograph close to his heart. The rose cradled gently in his hands, symbols, memories, truths. The veterans closed in around him, forming a soft circle, not to block him, not to shield him, but to stand with him, to carry the weight together. And Walter knew, in that quiet, beautiful moment, that he was not alone. The years had not erased him. The sacrifices had not been forgotten. The stories would live on, carried by new hands, by new hearts, by children who would one day tell their own children about the day. The world stood still to honor an old man who had once stood for them. All the wind lifted, the flags danced, and Walter smiled not with sadness, not with regret, but with a heart full of something he had thought he'd lost forever hope. The applause softened again, the square bathed in golden light, as Walter stood at the heart of the gathering. The veterans around him stood shoulder to shoulder, a living testament to stories written in sacrifice and service. Their eyes met his with the quiet recognition only they could understand. Walter's breath came deep and steady. The moment felt timeless. As if the past and the present had woven themselves into one unbroken line, the boy approached once more, his face lit by sunlight. His steps confident now, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. He held it out with both hands. "I made this for you, Sir Walter." Crouched again, his knees aching, but his heart full, he took the paper, gently unfolded it with. Crit was a drawing, a simple crayon sketch, a figure in uniform, a flag, the words, "Thank." Written in the uneven, careful letters of a child still learning. Walter blinked, his throat tightening all over again. He smiled, a real soft smile that reached every corner of his face. "Thank you, son. This means the world." The boy's eyes sparkled. "I'll never forget you, sir." Walter nodded, nor I. Youth boy stepped back into his mother's waiting arms. She smiled, her eyes glistening. The soldier who had walked beside Walter stepped forward again. "Sir, would you like to say something?" To the people, Walter's breath caught for a moment. He hesitated. Words had never been his way. He had lived through years of silence, of carrying weight without speaking it aloud, but as he looked out over the faces, as he saw the young, the old, the children, the families all gathered, all waiting, he felt the words stir in his chest. He straightened slowly, the toy soldier still in his pocket, the child's drawing pressed gently in his hand. He took a breath and spoke. "I didn't come here today to be seen. I didn't come here to be honored. I came because I miss them." The square fell silent, only the soft rustle of flags in the breeze. "I miss the men I stood beside, the friends I lost, the voices I still hear when the night gets too quiet. I came because some part of me still believes in what we stood for." His voice shook, but he held steady. "I didn't expect anyone to notice me. Most days I feel like the world has moved on without us, but today you reminded me that we are not forgotten." The crowd held its breath, not a whisper, not a shuffle, only stillness. "I want to thank the boy who saw me, who reminded me that sometimes it takes the smallest hand to lift the heaviest heart." He paused, swallowed hard. "I want to thank all of you for standing here, for remembering, for carrying these stories forward. Because they matter, we matter, and long after the parades are over, long after the uniforms fade, the stories must remain." A soft sound of sniffles rippled through the crowd. Some wiped tears, others simply bowed their heads. Walter took another breath, his voice barely above a whisper. "I walk today not for myself, but for them, for every name carved in stone, for every empty chair at a family table, for every heart that carries the weight of service. Let the words settle the silence, gentle but full. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for remembering." He lowered his head, the words spent the weight of emotion. Heavy in his chest, but no longer crushing. The applause returned, soft, respectful. A rising tide of hands meeting hands in quiet unity. Walter lifted his eyes again. The soldier stepped forward, placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "Sir, that was beautiful." Walter nodded, his heart full beyond measure. The boy clapped softly, his small face lit with pride. And in that moment, in that fragile, perfect breath of time, Walter knew he would carry this with him forever. Not the medals, not the battles, but this, the simple human kindness, the reaching across time, the shared breath of gratitude that had made him whole again. The wind stirred once more. The sunlight warmed his skin, and for the first time in years, he felt peace. The square slowly began to return to life. Children laughed softly in the distance. Families gathered their belongings, but the faces near. Walter lingered, the warmth of the moment still holding them together. Walter exhaled, the weight on his chest had eased the ache he had carried for so long, had softened into something gentle, something bearable. The soldier at his side remained quiet, standing tall, his eyes reflecting both respect and something more, something personal. A spark of understanding that would never fade. The boy still clutched his mother's hand, but his eyes never left Walter. The small paper drawing still folded safely in Walter's palm. A treasure that meant more than words could say. One by one people came forward, a handshake, a nod, A soft thank you whispered. In passing, some carried stories, others carried only their hearts, but each one left something behind, a kindness. A piece of themselves woven into the fabric of the morning. A little girl in pigtails held out a single daisy, her face solemn, her hands shaking slightly as she offered the flower. Walter knelt again, took the daisy as if it were gold. Thank you, sweetheart. This is beautiful. The girl beamed, curtsied in the clumsy way only a child can, and skipped back to her family, the wind stirred brushing over his skin, lifting the corners of the old handkerchief, peeking from his pocket. So the soldier shifted slightly. Sir, I'll walk you wherever you need to go. If you'd like company. Walter smiled softly. Thank you, son. I think I'd like that. They began to walk slow, unhurried, the finish line behind them, now the path ahead open and wide. The boy's mother approached, her voice gentle. Would it be all right if we walked too? He doesn't want to leave just yet. Walter's smile deepened. Of course I'd be honored. And so they moved together, a small, unlikely group, a man of many years, a soldier, a child, a mother bound by something invisible but unbreakable. The boy looked up as they walked. Sir, do you think heroes ever get scared? Walter's steps faltered. For just a moment he looked down, met the boy's curious eyes, and nodded slowly. As some heroes get scared all the time. The boy's brow furrowed. Then why do they still help people, even when they're scared? Walter's heart swelled, because that's what makes them heroes. Not that they're never afraid, but that they keep going anyway. Boy's eyes widened, a quiet understanding lighting his face. The soldier at Walter's side smiled to nodding, the lesson sinking deep into his bones as, while they walked on the park opening around them, the sunlight filtering through the leaves, the sound of laughter and soft music in the distance. Walter felt it, the peace, the quiet joy, the sense that for the first time in years he was not walking alone. He was surrounded by the living echoes of the very things he had fought to protect: laughter, innocence, kindness. They passed a small pond, the breeze rippling the water. The boy let go of his mother's hand and reached for Walter's again. Without hesitation, Walter took it, his old fingers wrapping gently around the tiny hand that had saved him in more ways than one. The soldier chuckled softly. Looks like you've got a new partner. Sir, Walter laughed, a soft, warm sound that surprised even him. I guess I do. They paused near the water's edge, the child tossing pebbles, the soldier skipping stones. Walter watching, smiling, breathing. For the first time he allowed himself to simply be. No weight, no burden, only the present tanned. In that moment he understood it had never been about medals or parades or even the battles themselves. It had always been about the people the lives touched, the small acts of kindness, the gentle reminders that no matter how much time passed, no one is truly forgotten. The boy laughed, the water danced, the wind lifted, and Walter stood in the heart of it all, whole scene alive. They stayed by the water for a long while. No one rushed, no one hurried them along. The world seemed to know that some moments should not be interrupted. Walter sat on a wooden bench, the boy beside him, the soldier standing close, the child still clutched the small crayon drawing he had made earlier, the paper slightly wrinkled, but his grip firm. The boy spoke softly. Will you come back next year? Sir Walter smiled. The question gentle, innocent, and yet somewhere deep inside it warmed him more than anything else had in a long time. I'd like that, son. I'd like that very much, though. Boy grinned, swung his legs back and forth. The sun danced across the water, the breeze soft and kind. The soldier crouched near the bench. Sir, may I ask what kept you going through it all? Walter's eyes drifted toward the sky. He took a slow breath, let the silence stretch before answering the faces. He whispered, the people, the ones who stood beside me. The ones who never came home, I carried them, still do. The soldier nodded, his eyes shining. Thank you, sir, for carrying them, for carrying all of us. Walter smiled softly. I'm not the only one. We all carry something, that's how we keep going. The boy looked up, his small voice curious. Do you still miss them? Walter's heart ached. In the quietest way, every day, son, but missing them, remembering them, that's how they stay alive. The boy nodded solemnly, as if those words settled deep into his young heart, words he might not fully understand today, but would one day carry forward. When it mattered most, the soldier reached into his pocket, pulled out a small patch and insignia from his uniform. He held it out to Walter. Sir, for you, for today. For always. Walter's hand shook slightly as he accepted the patch. Thank you, son, I will treasure this. They sat together in the stillness, No more words needed, the boy skipped a few more stones. The soldier watched over them quietly as the afternoon stretched. People began to drift away. The square slowly emptied, but the memory remained. Etched into every face that had witnessed it, Walter rose slowly from the bench, his knees stiff but his spirit light. The boy hugged him, suddenly arms wrapping tight around his waist. Walter's breath caught, but he returned the hug, his hand resting gently on the child's small back. "Thank you, sir," the boy whispered. "I'll never forget today, Walter." Yes. Eyes blurred, and he smiled through the warmth. "Neither will I," mother approached. Tears in her eyes, she mouthed, "Thank you," her voice too full to speak. Walter nodded gently. The soldier offered one last salute. "Sir, if you ever need anything, I'm just a call away." Walter returned the salute, lowered his hand, and for the first time in years, he felt the word peace settle softly across his shoulders. They parted ways slowly, the boy waving until Walter was almost out of sight, the mother's hand resting gently on his shoulder. The soldier standing tall, eyes on the horizon. Walter's steps were slow but sure, the toy soldier still. Safe in his pocket, the crayon drawing folded close to his heart, the patch tucked carefully into his hand, and, though the streets grew quiet, though the flags fluttered softly, the memory of the day burned bright within him, because sometimes it takes only one moment, one small heart, one gentle act, to remind the world who we are and who we must always strive to be. Walter disappeared down the path. The wind carried his name softly, the faces of those he carried walking with him still, and somewhere in the distance, a child's voice whispered once more, "Thank you."